Hello everyone, Prime here, and I hope that you enjoyed last year, so Happy New Year! Today we're going to be covering Apollo, so jumping right into this. He could be known as Agletes, Phoebus, meaning bright or pure, and he also went by Helios. He was a model Kouros, meaning youth, boy of noble rank, typically seen as a nude young man, and as such he isn't usually depicted having a beard, and was very athletic and had that sort of young but athletic build. Why he has a soul patch I'm not too sure, but whatever. So in Greek mythology, he was a god of music and depicted playing a golden lyre. The Muses, who were exclusively female, were led by Apollo and became known as Apollyon Musgetes. This is part of the reason why he was considered a deity of music, but not the sole reason or even necessarily the main reason. You see, Apollo was the patron of herds and flocks, and one day Hermes created a new instrument out of a tortoise shell and a few other parts. He used this new instrument to play the most beautiful music. One day, the young Hermes wandered into Apollo's treasured herd and stole 50 cattle, locking them away in some cave. He then removed his shoes and had the herd create several different tracks in several different directions so that it wouldn't be clear as to where the herd was or who necessarily took them. However, there was one catch. Hermes was discovered by one of the herdsmen, who he made swear not to tell anyone where the cattle had went. But when Apollo was enraged by the fact that he had no cattle, or 50 of his cattle were missing, it didn't take the herdsman too long to speak up. So Apollo brought this incident to Zeus directly, and eventually Hermes was forced to return the cattle. But eventually Apollo traded his 50 cattle for Hermes' lyre, and the music that he made with it almost completely solidified his status as the god of music. He was also the god of the sun, light, plague, archery, oracles, and knowledge, among a few other things. Apollo's daily task was to mount his 4-horse-drawn chariot and move the sun across the sky, so he was a fairly important deity to the Greeks. Son of Leto and Zeus, twin brother to Artemis, but Hera was none too pleased about the conception of Artemis or Apollo. You see, Hera banned Leto from giving birth on land, so Apollo was forced to be born on Delos, which was not considered to be a real island at the time. The island's locals aided the birth of Apollo, and in turn Leto vowed that Apollo would aid the people. By the age of 4, Apollo was a strong boy, receiving a silver bow from Vulcan, which he could use to fire off golden arrows. This was quite important because the island, or local island, was plagued by a python, which was a pretty dangerous beast. So Apollo decided that it was his job to slay this beast, and slay it he did. He went into the beast's lair, and it wasn't too happy to be disturbed, so it lunged at Apollo, who swiftly dodged the strike and retaliated with a swift arrow, which landed in the center of the python's head. And it didn't die instantly, it screamed out in all manner of agonies, and resisted the pain of death for as long as it could, but eventually succumbed and died. After this, Apollo merrily played a tune on his new instrument, gifted to him by Hermes after the trade. But unfortunately for Apollo, he had broken some sort of law or rule, and Zeus had to punish him. So after Apollo buried the beast, he hosted the Pythian Games at Delphi to atone for his crimes. Apollo even took part in these games, that would eventually go on to be held every 4 years. Zeus and Leto were proud of their son's beauty and grace when he was in the company of the Muses, and just generally. Though something to be less proud of was, of course, Apollo's relationship history. It's a pretty up and down history. You see, Apollo with Trachyon had Asclepius. Trachyon died in labor and was placed on a pyre, but Apollo sliced open her belly to rescue Asclepius, and his name, surprisingly enough, meant to cut open. In a variation of this myth, Apollo loved Coronis, and she was pregnant with his child. However, she decided to commit adultery while she was pregnant, and Apollo didn't like this at all, so he had Artemis kill her, which she complied with. Artemis destroyed Coronis and some others with plague arrows, but Apollo still managed to rescue Asclepius from her belly. Either way, Chiron raised the child and taught him the arts of healing, allowing him to revive the dead and angering Zeus greatly. Necromancy is not on Zeus's to be proud of list, and he used a thunderbolt to strike down Asclepius, killing him instantly and enraging Apollo. And because Apollo was very mad at the death of his son, as would be fair enough to be, Apollo slew the Cyclops that created Zeus's thunderbolt. Zeus was none too pleased about this and forced Apollo to become a herdsman for about a year. It's better than killing Apollo. So, that's that. Apollo also didn't just have solely female relationships, but one of the men that he did fall in love with was a chap called Hyacinthus, or Hyacinthus, I'm not too sure how to pronounce that. Either way, he was another young man just like Apollo. Apollo was teaching him how to throw a discus and really wanted to impress the young man. So, he threw the discus with all of his strength. Hippocanthus was struck by the discus, and even after applying some herbs to heal the wound, Hippocanthus died. Grief-stricken by this death, Apollo constructed a new flower to sort of honor the death of his lover. He also inscribed the letters AL or AI, it wasn't really too clear as to which letters this was, into the flower, and the flowers were made famous for their remarkable beauty, encapsulating Apollo's sorrow. That's pretty ironic if you ask me. You know, it's interesting to see how tolerant the ancient Greeks or Romans were when it came to heterosexual relationships. I can't find or couldn't really tell you many, if any, examples of heterosexual relationships within Norse mythology, for example, so I think it's pretty telling of how they viewed that sort of thing. But Egyptian mythology is another example of how tolerant they seem to be within their religion, because you have to figure, if they were tolerant enough about this sort of thing to include them in these stories, and Apollo, who's considered to be one of the most important deities within their mythology, he's allowed to be openly, well, bisexual, because he wasn't necessarily purely heterosexual or purely homosexual. I think it just says a little something about the society and how potentially tolerable they were. I don't actually know historically whether it was frowned upon to be in a heterosexual relationship, but this is fairly telling. So despite all of these incidents with potential lovers, Apollo never actually got married. And he even got rejected once. Cassandra, a priestess, made a deal with him in one of the temples of Delphi. In return for a kiss, he was to give her the ability to see into the future, and she wasted no time and instantly kissed him. But upon receiving this ability, she saw in the future that Apollo would be burning down one of her temples, and she spat in the god's face, prompting Apollo to add something to his gift, as he couldn't take away the gift once he had given it. And what he added to this gift was pretty unfortunate. Cassandra would see into the future, yes, and see anything that could happen, but no one would believe her prophecies. And so, when Cassandra tried to warn her people about the Trojan horse and the Greeks hiding inside, no one believed her. You know what happened after that. So despite the fact that Apollo never got married, the daughter of Ivanos, Marpessa, came close when she ran away with a son of Poseidon, known as Ida. You see, Ivanos decided that only the best of the very best man would be worthy enough for his daughter, and so several men wanted to battle it out for her love, and this one man had racked up quite the kill streak of different men, and he was undefeated in the battlefield. So knowing this, Ida decided to sneak into Ivanos' keep and run away with Marpessa under the cover of night. Now, before you start thinking that Marpessa was a bad daughter, remember that she would have had to have married any man who won the contest without seeing them necessarily, or perhaps she would have seen them, but she wouldn't necessarily get to spend much time with them before a marriage, or, any of the important things. Ida actually enchanted her, and she just fell in love with him. That was her choice, whereas her staying and not having a choice as to who she would have married. When the king noticed that his daughter was missing, he galloped after her on mighty steeds and even tried to ride across water, but after he realized that there was no hope of finding his precious daughter, he beheaded his horses and drowned. How he even made it so far into a body of water that he could even drown through riding just a horse is pretty incredible if you ask me, but there you go. Eventually, Apollo also set his sights on the princess, and Ida and Apollo battled fiercely over this daughter of Ivanos. Zeus noticed the fighting and eventually placed a lightning bolt between Apollo and Ida, similar to how he placed a lightning bolt between Hercules and Ares to break up their fight. Ultimately, Zeus mediated between the two and gave the decision of who should marry Marpessa to Marpessa herself, and she stated that Apollo was a god who would forever be young and beautiful, whilst Marpessa was a mortal who would be young for a time, but that time would pass and Apollo would leave her, whereas Ida would also grow old with her. As such, Ida was the chosen man, and Apollo respected this decision, and was impressed by Marpessa's maturity. He wished the couple well, and left them with a smile on his face. Now for some facts about Apollo. First up, dolphins and wolves were sacred to him, as was the laurel tree. The Romans did not change his name. Apollo remains one of the few gods that had that happen to him. Of course, there were still differences, such as variations in the different myths about Asclepius that I told you before, and the roles in which Apollo was most famous for. In Greek society, it was the fact that he was the god of light, whereas the Romans saw his healing aspects and prophetic aspects as more important. But that was the video, guys, on Apollo. I hope that you did enjoy it, and if you did, go ahead and leave a like, as that always helps me out and motivates me to post more content. And subscribe to the channel if you want more content just like this. Now, next up will either be Apollo or Poseidon or Guan Yu. I'm also going to add to the polls, and I believe there was someone else. I'll just flick through the comment section just to check who is next up in the polls. So yes, just vote in the polls. You should see them in the top right corner of your screen, the little eye icon. If it's not there, then it will be up soon enough, so don't worry. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. Have a good day. I've been Prime, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.